I want to start my my talk of today by pointing out that the trend that I'm going to talk about today, the decreasing value of a university degree, is not a new trend, of course, not brand new. It's been developing for a number of years. It has been to a certain extent reinforced by the COVID-19 pandemic. To what extent that has been the case, I think is still early to tell, but it has. That's already a documented fact. But I want to point out from the start that this remains, for now anyway, first and foremost, an American phenomenon. To be understood in the American higher education context, primarily at least, okay? There seems to be, and this is, as I'll start explaining in a minute, not a new phenomenon in the US, but there seems to be a kind of declining perception of the deteriorating perception among the public at large, I mean, but including students themselves or student college age young people and their parents, families, deteriorating perception of the value of higher education, of investing in a college degree. A lot of it is due, of course, to the specificity of the American system, but not all of it. First of all, and second, it's a trend to watch. It's beginning to happen in other places as well. The question is whether it'll spread to different models of education in other parts of the world. And that's basically my subject today, okay? Right now, the focus, at least for this kind of public disillusionment, is really on the US. Data on university enrollments, the value of the perceived value of higher education, of a college degree in other countries, other regions of the world, is much more mixed. I would say that a higher education degree is still viewed in many countries as key to higher earnings at the workplace, and this is backed up by plenty of data, okay, in plenty of countries. But what is becoming increasingly global, and what then should therefore raise some alarm among universities outside the US, I think, is, of course, the rise of micro-credentials, okay? When we're talking about threats to the, my subject today is not exactly threats to the university degree, but what causes the university, the college degree to lose value in the eyes of the public, as in terms of perception, okay? So micro-credentials are definitely one of the causes, one of the reasons, okay? All these, by, you know, this term covers everything. Short online training programs in all shapes and forms, offered, yes, by more and more universities, okay? But also more and more by commercial platforms and corporate employers, and that's of course the key point, at a fraction of the cost that a classical undergraduate program at university would imply, even where higher education is virtually free. Why? Because being enrolled, for example, in Europe, in most European universities, you get an undergraduate degree, a graduate degree. In other words, an undergraduate program lasts 3 years. I think it's the average. In the US, it's 4 years. So we're talking about a period of 3 or 4 years where a student is usually enrolled full-time. And even in systems where higher education is virtually free, like, for example, in France, where I am, you still have to take into account living expenses. Students have to support themselves, cover their living expenses for 3 or 4 years. It usually is very difficult to combine with a full-time job, virtually impossible, okay? So a lot of students have part-time jobs, but still it's not open to everyone, okay? So even when you don't have a very expensive system, like it's the case in the US, there's no doubt that this rise of micro-credentials is presenting a type of attractiveness that the prospect of a 3 or 4 year study program at a university cannot match in terms of the pluses that micro-credentials can provide, okay? These new models of post-secondary education, they're sometimes referred to as DIY education, do-it-yourself education. I think that's a good, that's a telling image. They're not just a much lower financial investment than with universities and colleges. They also, among the other advantages that they offer, they also offer 24/7 access to what is increasingly called just-in-time learning solutions. Listen to that expression, take it in. Just-in-time learning solutions, as if you were in a hardware store, more or less, okay? Just-in-time learning solutions that often don't lead to or amount to a degree, because increasingly they don't have to. The qualifications that they can bring, of course, a qualification, but you can also opt to upskill or reskill, get some credit through micro-credentials, and you don't necessarily have to stack them into a degree at the end of the process, okay? They can be, of course, stackable, again, for qualifications, but you can pursue them as standalone units whenever that is convenient, okay? And of course, this is the result of another trend I've already talked about here and written about extensively, which is also spreading at a global level. And that's the increasing focus of universities on employability. I've talked about that a lot. I've written about it in some of my reports and some of my notes. So employability and therefore skill-centered education, consistent with the rising market value of transferable skills that a graduate can easily take to a first job and then transfer from one job to another. I have pointed out many times in my work for FIUC-IFCU over this past few years, how this fact of universities increasingly focusing on teaching skills is turning universities into vocational schools and represents a growing shift away from their traditional mission to provide a general education, to nurture in students intellectual curiosity, to train at least a portion of them to specialize in a single discipline that will later shape their entire professional career. This is not, of course, disappearing, okay? These missions are not disappearing, dead or dying, but by all accounts, they should become very secondary missions over the next few years, perhaps over the next decade, okay? For those universities that will manage to, excuse me, that will manage to transition through all of the changes that I'm talking about here. And the reasoning, that won't be the core business of universities anymore. And the reasoning here is simple. If universities, because they're undergoing economic and societal pressure, now promote the added value of a college education as the provision of skills and of skills that easily transfer to the workplace, then this raises the question of what makes them more qualified to accomplish that, given their historical mission, which I've just mentioned. What makes them more qualified to accomplish that than multiple non-university outlets that were created for this specific purpose over the past decade, or then apprenticeship, or vocational programs and schools? Okay, it raises that question. So it's a long introduction, but I'll give you my outline now. what I propose to do then is to explore this issue by first addressing the American context. Here's my outline. Let me move this, not sure where. Okay, the title of the presentation, you know. Okay, so first I propose to focus on the American case, okay, the American context, which, yes, as I said, is specific due to the high cost of higher education in the United States, but may still be an indicator of a measure of public disillusionment about university degrees that will spread over to other regions of the world. As I said, that's already undeniably the case in the UK. Then in the second part, I will address the ongoing expansion of the micro-credential or the DIY education system and how it undermines the very concept of a 3 or 4 year undergraduate program. And finally, I will offer some reflections on the broader societal context of this debate, which is the declining status of knowledge, in particular of scientific knowledge. And after that, I would like to open this a bit to discussion. The problem is that I'll be seeing you, but you won't be seeing me because I don't think, I'll try again maybe to activate my camera when I'm finished. But I'm skeptical of results because I've had this problem several times this week. So my first part is the American context. I said it was not this kind of public disillusionment with the promise of higher education in the US is not new. The first wave of that occurred in the wake of the financial and economic crisis of 2008, the Great Recession. The Great Recession forced public authorities to cut funding across the board for higher education. And though enrollments increased at first, which is an interesting economic phenomenon, usually in times of recession, university enrollments increase, okay, which is perhaps a little bit, I don't know, counterintuitive. Despite that, many institutions didn't recover for years after the recession was over, and students had to face a steep rise in the cost of tuition because of the budget cuts, because of decreased public funding. In all of it in a very uncertain economic context, okay? So this is the first market occurrence when suddenly the value of a university degree, the investment in time and money that it represents begins to be questioned on a large scale. In the aftermath of the crisis, graduates who were seeking to enter the labor market experienced unprecedented levels of unemployment and underemployment. Look at this. I need to click, I need to switch. Yeah, no, it's this one. Okay, here's the chart. This is the, these are the rates. If you look at around 2010, you will see, and subsequent years, between 10 and 12, you can see an absolute peak of the upper line is underemployment and the lower line, lighter blue, is unemployment. This is the class of 2008, 2009, okay? And these rates of underemployment and unemployment are really unprecedented. And you can see that even 10 years, a decade after the recession, rates of underemployment for people who graduated in 2008-9 were still higher than before the recession, while rates of unemployment were stabilizing to values still higher than, but closer to what they had been before the recession, okay? And this has had a kind of almost traumatic impact in terms of perceptions of the value of a university degree. Given the cost of higher education in the US and the fact that because of the recession, costs to the students increased further, and therefore got students into even heavier debt, we can understand it's actually perfectly logical that since the graduates of the end of that decade experienced underemployment and employment for such a prolonged period of time, that threw some discredit on the merits of university degree. The problem is that it has lingered. Fast forward a little over 10 years, and you find that in the last decade, with the recession now in the distant past, the American public has increasingly lost confidence in the economic benefits of a college degree. And interestingly, this pretty much cuts across the political divide. You find comparable results among people who identify with Democrats and people who identify with Republicans. And you know that in the US, everything has become political today, including perceptions of college, whether college is worth it, is worth the investment or not. This one, you find results that really cut across political divides. I'll mention a study conducted last year by a nonpartisan research outlet called Public Agenda and the newspaper USA Today, which finds that slightly less than half, 49% of Americans, there's the study, think the economic benefits of a college education outweigh the costs. You see, not even a majority, 49%. I don't know to what extent the slide itself is clear. I'll read out the way that the statements were phrased in the survey. On the left, anyway, you can see the orange is the share of respondents saying or agreeing with the statement that, quote, a college education is still the best investment for people who want to get ahead and succeed. Okay, that's 49% in total. And then 51% in blue. I'm looking only at the total, the top line, okay? And then you can see, of course, the political breakdown, but I'm addressing only the top, in other words, the figures for the total. 51% then in blue, so a small majority agree with the statement, quote, a college education is a questionable investment because of high student loans and limited job opportunities. This study also shows that many Americans view college as expensive, time-consuming. You see, time and money are key elements, and 66%, two-thirds of respondents in this survey believe that the university is an institution stuck in the past, okay? Stuck in the past, two-thirds of respondents. Overall, 74% of people surveyed here say that there are many ways to succeed in today's labor market without a college education, okay? These are the sample here of people interviewed is adults, working adults, with or without college-age children, and with or without children in college, okay? So there's kind of a mixed but representative sample. So these are very important findings. 66% people saying the university is an institution stuck in the past, and 74% saying that there are many ways to succeed in today's labor market without a college education. This last observation, that there are many ways other than a college education to succeed professionally, that takes us directly to the alternatives that have increasingly been offered over the past decade through these digital platforms, in other words, micro-credentials and DIY education. So I'm going back to the outline slide. I'm moving on to my second part, okay? It's worth pointing out that these learning solutions, as they are increasingly called, by and large, are still vastly geared to an adult public, either working or unemployed, but usually people seeking to upskill or reskill, as I pointed out at the beginning. It's an offer whose attractiveness literally boomed during the pandemic. That doesn't seem to be long-lasting, though. There was a widespread belief in the first few months, even the first year of the pandemic, that this would be a watershed, a real turnaround for educational platforms online. The data now is more mixed. Perhaps it won't be, after all, but that's another subject. Okay, there's no doubt that it boomed. The demand boomed during the pandemic. But okay, so for now, it is still essentially, or at least for the most part of it, market geared to adult learners. But micro-credentials are now increasingly being promoted and opted for by high school graduates as an alternative to college education. The data shows that. The broad context for this developing trend, as I pointed out earlier, is, of course, the growing emphasis on skills, in particular on soft skills, as key to navigating the workplace, the ever-evolving workplace under the impact of technological innovations. And this is something that we've seen develop steadily over the past 10 years, and it's now accelerating. The pace of evolution is accelerating. In this respect, it's also worth taking a look at what employers are saying about the skilled students who just graduated from university bring to the workplace. This is also a very interesting data point. Some surveys indicate that there is a growing disconnect between the skills and competencies that universities purport to impart and students believe they are getting, on the one hand, and on the other hand, what employers expect of these graduates from day one on the job. I'll show you again some American data here. A group called the Society for Human Resource Management. It's a group that focuses on HR, human resources, and higher education. It shows several interesting things in a study that it carried out in 2019, so before the pandemic. First, the broad context of the study. This is important. This is the broad context, okay? And the broad context is that the unemployment rate for university graduates grew from 4.3 to 5.6% in those 17 years, between 2000 and 2017. So instead of declining, as it would if higher education was increasingly the chosen path toward a good paying job and steady career, etc., unemployment rate has in fact grown during those almost 20 years. Then in terms of adequacy between how students on one hand and employers on the other perceive those skills and competencies that students get in college, graduate from college with, some data from the National Association of Colleges and Employers Job Outlook Report of 2018, which the HR study also leans on. Take a look at it. This is kind of amazing, okay? We're dealing here with perceptions, and this is a comparison between how employers view the skills of the graduates they just hired and how those graduates themselves view their own skills. And you can see that for virtually every skill, the gaps in perceptions are really staggering, okay? So this skill gap, even more pronounced in tech fields, in technology fields than what you see here. These are soft skills, what you see here on this slide. That's soft skills, right? The gap is even more pronounced in tech fields. In other words, students getting degree in technology at university. This is, of course, extremely institution dependent. I'm giving you global mean data. There is a gap, let's say at a macro scale. And that's one of the factors that has been prompting many companies to start their own training programs or boot camps. And this is, of course, primarily the case with big tech companies like Google, like AWS, IBM, and others. Google, for example, has a 6-week program that's called Grow with Google that teaches coding and other technical skills, all highly specialized, 6 weeks altogether, okay? All highly specialized. These units of learning and this technical skill teaching program include none of those non-cognitive skills that you see here on this slide that are often associated with liberal arts degrees. Things like critical thinking, communication, collaboration, etc., etc. None of that, all technical, all coding, for example. And increasingly, employers are reconsidering long-standing requirements for a 4-year degree. That's an interesting trend, and it's really emerging. This is more recent than the other trends or phenomena that I've been talking about until now. In the US in particular, we see this in the process of emerging, but as you know, what begins in the US very often spreads to the rest of the world for better or worse. So in the US, for example, this has this meaning this employers beginning to reconsider their requirements for a 4-year degree, which of course has been the norm forever, for decades. We can see that this movement has extended to some states in the US, like the state of Maryland, Pennsylvania, Utah, or Florida, that no longer require candidates to have a college degree to apply for many jobs. I'm talking about state jobs, right? Public jobs, including mid-level positions and even teaching jobs, for which a degree, a college degree, is no longer required. In the case of Pennsylvania, the governor's executive order, the new governor who just took office at the beginning or mid-January, one of his first actions was to issue an executive order. That was actually January 18th, so it's very recent, to issue an executive order that opens up 92% of state government jobs to applicants without a college education. 92%. This is the state of Pennsylvania. 92% of state government jobs, including mid-level jobs. And as I pointed out earlier, even jobs that require good level of skills, to applicants without a college education. This is in line with a Harvard Business School Burning Glass Institute report called the Emerging Degree Reset, okay? Came out last year, 22. This report finds that between 2017 and 2019, employers changed degree requirements for 46% of middle skill and 31% of high skill jobs, okay? So changing degree requirements simply means that in most cases, university degree is no longer required, okay? Doesn't mean they don't require anything else, but they begin to value other types of learning, education, experience, working experience, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have the other item, only 27%, that's out of the same study, 27% of these 46% could be considered cyclical resets. In other words, short-term responses to the pandemic due to the shortage of labor force, but 63% appear to be structural resets that began before the pandemic and represent a potentially permanent shift, therefore, in hiring practices. Other data that reinforces this finding, the evolution, look at that, the evolution of the share of BA+ postings in IT jobs at big tech companies between 2017 and 2019. That's only 2 years, and you can see that except for Intel on top and IBM at the bottom, for all the other big ones, the GAFA basically, BA+ postings are between slightly and markedly fewer in 2019 than in 2017. Okay. This is only a small sample of this, of the broad data that's available on this trend. But it's definitely a trend and one to watch. And it's because of things like that that increasingly universities are entering in partnerships with industry and creating internship, for example, opportunities for students, or combining work and study. You see these offers increasingly proposed to students, made available to students. I could go on and on. As I said, I could show you more data, but I will close this part simply by emphasizing that all this being said, okay, nevertheless, the gaps in earnings for working people between those with and those without a college education remains on the average very wide. That gap, earning gap, remains on the average very wide through the developed and developing world. Let there be no doubt about that. In the US, where I'm drawing most of my data from, that gap, earning gap, has never been wider since 1990. 1990 is the year when the Federal Reserve Bank started collecting this kind of data for the first time, okay? And since 1990, with everything I've been telling you until now, the gap in earnings between people with a college degree and people without has never been wider, okay? So no, I'm not concluding from all this that the college degree is dying or dead, or that it will die anytime soon, especially accounting, of course, for vast regional variations around the world that I'm not covering here for lack of time, and with respect to many areas for lack of data. But you can see from this, albeit partial, broad picture that I'm presenting today, that there should be cause for alarm for many universities looking perhaps 10 years ahead. And to conclude, I just want to kind of address for a moment the broad global societal backdrop to all this, okay? The broader context of the what we can call the devaluation of the degree. It goes along with a general devaluation of knowledge and expertise. And that's my third part. We're back to the, okay, declining status of knowledge, which I'll address briefly. This is a briefer part, and then I'll conclude with that, okay? In fact, I'll just illustrate this part with a survey that came out a couple weeks ago in France, conducted by a polling institute called IFOP. And the reason I'm closing with this and even mentioning it is that this study has sent shockwaves through the French media here. It was discussed for, I don't know, maybe almost a week after it was released. The poll involved some 2,000, a little bit over 2,000 people, young people, aged between 11 and 24, but about 48% of respondents were aged 18 to 24. The poll was aimed to assess the impact of social media, in particular in these age brackets of Instagram, and even more significantly of TikTok, on these young people's adherence to science and facts, okay? That was the purpose of the study. And the results, especially compared to a similar study that the same polling institute had done in 2017, the results were really dumbfounding. For example, 1 in 6 respondents in this study thinks it's very possible that the Earth is flat. 19% believe that the pyramids were built by aliens. 46% believe that the Americans never landed on the moon. So that the moon landing is a hoax. 49% believe that astrology is a science. Not to mention the beliefs in conspiracy theories and fake news, with, for example, 26% of 18 to 24-year-olds believing that the massacre of civilians in Bucha by Russian soldiers was in fact staged by the Ukrainian authorities. Most significantly, 41% of that same age bracket, 18 to 24, believe, and that's probably the point that I want to emphasize the most, and so I'll repeat it. I'll finish the sentence and then I'll repeat it. 41 in this survey, 41% of people aged 18 to 24 believe that the reliability of information conveyed by influencers on TikTok is measured by the number of their followers. Okay, in other words, the more followers, the more what they say is viewed as reliable information. You have this part of the survey right here. Okay, it's 41% altogether, ages 11 to 24. But when you take that bracket, specifically 18 to 24, it's 40%. So it's basically the same number, which means that the perception is not dispelled as these young people grow up a bit. Okay, 41%. Why is this the most important finding? I believe because of course the spirit of research and the scientific method and all of that. So if you come to believe that the information that you get is reliable because the influencer that provides you with that information has more followers than another influencer, we could of course discuss that. I hope we will in a few minutes. But you know, what kind of society that introduces, or what will happen with this, for example, 10 years from now. We're talking about college, either college age youngsters of today, if you look at the age brackets, or college age youth of tomorrow. I could, of course, cite many other studies on social media addicted youngsters in other countries that would show comparable results, but you see what I'm getting at. We saw the peak of fake news and conspiracy theories that was generated during the COVID-19 pandemic. That's, of course, another case in point when it comes to the increasingly shakier status of knowledge, especially scientific, status of experts and expertise in general. And this is the much broader backdrop in which any reflection on the future value of university degree has to take place. Okay, so all of these developing trends put together, and I'm really concluding here, do paint a rather dim picture, I'd say, for the fate of the university degree in years to come. And frankly, I read the literature, the professional media, day in, day out. That's a big chunk of my job. And I don't see, other than suggestions that universities engage in basically the mainstreamization of micro-credentials, I don't see a whole lot of other suggestions, other options put forth in the specialized media. A suggestion to universities for ways to adapt to these developing trends in future years. Okay, I'm done. I'm sorry that I'm not ending on a happy note. None of the things I talked about today are actually happy things. So thank you for your patience and